Welcome back to a new episode of Conversations with Cohen. I'm excited to have someone who's become a fast friend of mine through the EY Entrepreneur of the Year program, Dilip Rao, who's the CEO and founder of Sharebite. And I was incredibly moved by his story that he shared during the interview process, and it was such that I've shared it with many people, many friends and colleagues over the months that followed, and I'm excited to have him as a guest today to share his story with all of you. So before we start, Dilip, would love for you to introduce yourself to everyone.
I think you did a fantastic job introducing me already. So thank you for that. Good to be here, Greg.
Thanks for coming. If we wind back the clock, as I understand it, you before you were a founder of a business, you had a career on Wall Street. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So what was that path that you were on?
I also had probably for another time, sort of a random kind of entry into Wall Street, right? Most investment bankers typically kind of go through the front door, which is, you go through an internship, you get recruited out of college, you go through an internship, and you get asked to come back. I had a very different path, but nonetheless, I was just grateful to be there.
Well, I mean,
And
what I'd say is, as somebody who went through a non-traditional path also to Wall Street by
yeah,
entering an ad in a newspaper and getting the standard, we'll put your resume on file, and then finally getting a call 9 months later. I'd love for you to share the non-traditional path you took.
oh, I didn't know that about you, Greg. Yeah, mine was a slightly different because Indian upbringing, Indian immigrant upbringing. I say this kind of half joking, but folks of Indian or Asian descent would probably relate to me if they're listening. Growing up in an Indian immigrant household, it typically the career choices now that the aperture is widened considerably nowadays, but growing up, especially in the '90s, it was pretty much hammered home. You got to it's a engineer, doctor, or failure, right? Um, I say the third one kind of half jokingly,
Half.
but half jokingly because it was kind of there was an undertone to it. So yeah, I checked the box. I studied engineering in undergrad. I didn't appreciate the engineering training at the time, but now I'm so grateful for all that training because it truly teaches you how to see the world very differently. You know, um, and so I was on a very different path. And I recently read this quote: um, "When you don't know where you're going, any path will do." Right? And so I didn't have much of a direction. Um, in terms of career, I knew I was ambitious, but I didn't know like in what capacity or in what way. And the my family went through a bit of a crisis, about 17 years ago, where my dad lost his job, and I guess the life that we thought we had all kind of came crashing down, right? So there I was, my mid 20s, um, realizing that like I needed to like really like step up and be the head of household all of a sudden, right? And I was inheriting all of this like responsibility and like payables and monthly fixed costs and whatnot. And to me, uh, and everyone has a lot of opinions or advice for you around those times. I got everything from like hang in there, buddy, all the way to like you don't really owe anything to anybody. Like go find your own path. Um, so and folks that have gone through turbulent times in their own lives, oftentimes what I've discovered is that they've had to dig deep in themselves and find out like what it is that they truly wanted, what purpose they were trying to kind of strive towards. And at the time, I really had like one sort of mission in mind, which was, um, I need to go pay the bills. And I've got, loans to pay back. I've got debt. I've got parents to take care of, a sister in college. And so I started applying for jobs, and just never really. And I knew that I wanted to be on Wall Street because I felt that like that's one place. And I'd read this memo about Sidney Weinberg a long time ago, who's the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, and I was really inspired by him. And which was, at the time, I may not be telling the story exactly as is, but the story goes is such that he didn't know how to read. He didn't know how to read and write, and he used to shine shoes, and he was like the best shoe shiner that Samuel Sachs had ever met. So when Samuel Sachs found out that this kid didn't know how to read, he sent him to penmanship school, and he said, "I'm gonna put you through penmanship school." And this guy was the first partner of Goldman Sachs that was not part of the family, right? So Marcus Goldman's son-in-law was Samuel Sachs, right? So it's hence the Goldman Sachs namesake. And he ended up ultimately running the firm, and then for decades, and then he became an advisor to like heads of state, heads of countries. He did all of these things, but this is a kid from an underprivileged or unprivileged background that barely knew how to read, lived in tenements, right? And so I remember thinking like, man, I see that is a story that like many of us, that's like the American dream, right? Many of us can get behind that. And so I was really inspired by that. So I was like, I'm foolish. It's like I was young and foolish when I was young and foolish. So like um, I uh, I set out to. I was like, I'm going to go work at Goldman Sachs. I had no idea how I'm going to do it. Whatever. So I get this interview. I'll tell the short version of it. I get the interview. My resume barely had anything on it. Right. I was like just disjointed, no direction, no aim, no like whatever. I did have some work experience. I'd done things here and there. And then um, I got a friend who was in recruiting over there set me up with an interview. I went into the interview. The people who interviewed were super sweet. One of the guys that interviewed me was not very sweet to me. He literally looked at my resume and goes, "How did you get in the building? Like, are you related to somebody, or like at the firm, or like are you a client?" I was so confused when he was asking those questions. And I said, "No, I don't. I'm not related to anybody or anything like that." So he kind of like he was like goes through my resume, and sort of unceremoniously kicks me out. And I go home, and it was like the longest subway ride I've ever taken back home. And I really felt that I squandered this opportunity to truly take care of my parents when they needed me the most, right? They've never really needed me for anything, right? They've always been like this incredible support system that I was truly privileged to have. And they put up with all kinds of like things that, I wasn't perfect. Nobody is. And, any mistakes I ever had, they just showered me with support and love. And now that I'm a dad, I look back and think, man, like I used to say the words like, I grew up with nothing, and I truly only meant it from a financial standpoint. But now I'm realizing that like I actually grew up with a tremendous amount of wealth, but it came in the form of like love and undivided, attention and heavy investment of time from both parents, which itself is a privilege and luxury. And so to me, this was an opportunity to take care of them and, give back to them when they needed me the most, and they weren't able to come out of this situation. So I was totally hell bent on making that happen. So I go home, I don't hear back, find out a week later I didn't get the job there. I started dialing for dollars basically. And I started cold calling. I started doing all this stuff. I got hung up on all the banks have this like central switchboard. At Credit Suisse, we used to have 212-325-2000, right? So that was you call that number, you could pretty much like ask for anybody, right?
Right.
If you worked at Credit Suisse, uh, I would have called and said, "Hey, is Gregg Cohen there?" They would have transferred me. The switchboard just transfers you. But I found out what that was, and I started dial. I looked people up, dial. And so somehow I'll save the details of that for possibly another time. But uh, somehow I find myself back at Goldman Sachs, uh, interviewing for a job that I knew a little bit more about now, and that was in August of 2007. And so this time around, I remember walking into it was back when One New York Plaza before they moved into the current headquarters. I walk into One New York Plaza, and I see and I go through this interview process, the super day interview process. And all of that, the dialing for dollars and this like bullheaded persistence, like I was like hell bent. I mean, look, if I got a job somewhere else, I wouldn't have said no because I needed the job at the time. But I needed someone to take a chance on me. And the people that took a chance on me, my thing from then on was I really didn't know what responsibility was until I found out that we didn't like I needed to be the responsible one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly it was like I'm going to do everything to keep this job. I'm going to do everything to not just keep this job but excel at it. I'm going to be the first guy in, I'm going to be the last guy out. I will literally run through walls, right? To make sure that like I am the best. And that I think that mindset, maybe I had it in me previously, but it's really knowing that like if I don't do this, we don't get to eat.
Mm.
If I don't do this, we lose a roof over our head.
Mm.
Man, that type of stuff like unlocks like all kinds of like innovation and like urgency to do that. And in hindsight, I look back at all that stuff, and I think that was actually interesting training ground for being an entrepreneur, right? Being a founder, being CEO. Like, uh, so yeah, so that was so like I kind of dialed for dollars to get into Wall Street, and so my first job was they used to call them contingent workers, but I was like in the prime brokerage department there, and is a fancy word for basically a consultant or temp, right?
Right.
So a year later, right after Bear Stearns had collapsed, um, like there was a senior person at the firm that was like, "Hey, I don't know if even we're going to be around this time next year." So my heart starts racing. I'm like, I got to figure out what to do. And so the interesting thing is that partner, I remember saying, "Hey, look, there are these flight to safety, flight to quality banks out there that are not American. They don't have any exposure to these things like we do. I would apply for jobs there." And I really, really, really wanted to work in this business called leverage finance, right? Because I was really interested in like how companies get into trouble. Because I saw what happened to my dad's company, the company my dad worked at.
Mm.
Um, and I was really curious about like leverage and like debt and like all of that stuff. So I was hell bent on joining this business called leverage finance, and Credit Suisse was like the number one bank at that. So kept applying to every single job, like just every job I just applied for it. Then a year later, in August of 2008, I walked into that building. And that was a formative experience. So, I stayed there for a very long time, and I worked my way into whatever it is that I needed to. But I literally I got thrown into a rotation program in my early years. I got to have mentors sponsors at all the way to the senior levels. Um, in a weird way, I think I got very lucky joining at the time that I did because I got a lot of exposure to senior folks, and it was a truly wonderful firm to work at, and who, incredibly hardworking people, incredibly bright, and just good human beings for the most part that I got to work with. And yeah, so that's my experience on Wall Street. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details there, but um, to glaze over the next 8 years or 6 years, I think the entrepreneurial journey for me was always very entrepreneurial growing up, right? Also circumstantial. So like, I never wanted to be a burden on my parents, but so 10 years ago, I went through a near-death experience. You had talked to me on July 4th, 2014. Hey, Dilip, what are you all about? I would have told you, hey, man, life's good, right? It's great. It's never been better. And then a day later, I'm crossing the street to go to the gym on 54th Street and 2nd Avenue. And this 87-year-old comes speeding down 54th Street and turns and hits me. Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of problems about like the traffic patterns in New York City, because like a walk isn't really a walk sign, it's dodge traffic, because like cars on the other side have a green light, right? So, and it's also a no fault state, so like that's a whole different sort of topic, but um you know, Tokyo, the Japanese get this right. If you walk in Tokyo, a walk sign means walk. That means you can literally walk anywhere, right?
Just literally had a friend who was there last week who sent us a video, and so we
It's
witnessed it.
beautiful. It's beautiful. I mean, when it comes to like civic duty, like they do such a phenomenal job of like just instilling that into their children from a young age. It's really inspiring. And so yeah, New York City. So this guy hits me. I have my whole day planned out. My right knee takes the first impact. My head goes through the windshield. I go flying off the car. Um, and I'm kind of like shell shocked. I can't believe this just happened to me. And this woman comes to my aid, and this is before like the ride sharing services existed. So um, probably waiting for a yellow cab to go to the airport. Drops her bags, comes running over, and goes, "Young man, are you okay?" And so I'm like, "All right, well, yeah, I'm everything's great." uh, so I'm about to stand up, and she goes, "Stop! Don't get up. I'm a nurse." And so those words, still like echo in my head, like all the time. And it turns out that I don't know the medical conditions, but like it turns out after a traumatic brain injury, like if you get up abruptly or something like that, your spine can apparently collapse, as I've been told. Um, or and then you're kind of done anyway, right after that. So so she saves my life, and so she comes to my aid, grabs my phone. Do you have anybody? So I give her my wife's phone number. Um, Fast forward, ambulance comes, I black out. I'm like unconscious. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but I get taken to the hospital. I can't wake. I can't feel anything from the neck down.
Mm.
I wake up. So I'm going through this journey in my head of like, man, I've heard life is short, but like, I don't know, it's this short. I am 33 years old at the time. Like, life's going great. I had just started to enjoy things. You know what I mean? And and then you start to get into these like higher order kind of, wow, you know, what's my purpose? Why did I go through this stuff? Why do I have to keep going through these things, right? Like, I've been dealt crazy hands and like somehow figured out how to like work my way out of those situations. This is physical. I don't know if I'll ever be able to work my way out of this. Like, what if I'm paralyzed from the neck down? I don't want to live like this. I don't want to be a inconvenience to anybody either, right? So just like end it. So my wife comes running over. I initially am in like crisis mode. I'm like, yeah, everything's great. Don't worry. Just but on the inside, I can't move anything from neck down. I'm like strapped into the
Mm.
stretcher. And again, another parallel to entrepreneurship, right? So I heard someone say you're going to really come to appreciate the duck, especially like especially if you're CEO of a company, right? The pressures that get put on you are like very different than any other job that you've ever held, because it becomes like a lonely job, and and it's one of those things where like the duck, right? You keep up appearances above water, you look graceful, it looks like everything looks great, but underneath you are
You're working
paddling like
hard, right?
hell. Oh,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
paddling like hell just to stay afloat, let alone move, right? So, I began to respect ducks a little bit more. Anything with web feet, for that matter, that floats on water. Um, but yeah, so having gone through this experience and not being able to feel anything from the neck down, um, it puts you on this entirely different mental journey. And then I had a concussion and all these like other bodily injuries, and it sounds cliche, but um, I really believe that gratitude is an incredible, like incredible thing. It's a force multiplier on so many different fronts. It's an incredible healer. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, I've been through some crazy things in life, but like, again, speaking with the Japanese, there's this old proverb, right? Fall 7 times, stand up 8. It's a Japanese proverb. And every time I've ever sort of metaphorically fallen, um, I've somehow found the inspiration to like get back up one more time, to the point where like you reinvent yourself and like the previous you is like almost unrecognizable, because like life doesn't necessarily get easier, you just get stronger. And so having gone through that experience, I remember thinking to myself like, wow, um so this is it, huh? Like, this is what you go through, and one day it's out, lights out. And so anyway, look, I was fortunate. I had some time to stare into the lights, fortunate enough to get some feeling back in my body again. And I mentioned this to you before, like I there only people who've been through what I've discovered throughout the years is that people who've been through near death experiences like that can see this and feel this with like every fiber of their being when I say this. There are very few times in life where I've felt that alive. I know it sounds crazy because I'm like, 80% dead at the time, right? But like you're, on the verge, you're at the precipice, and suddenly like you're like, you're staring into the abyss, and then like something kind of like pulls you back. It's like a bungee cord, like you just jumped, and then you didn't hit the end, you just got pulled back out. And so for me, it's like there's the bottomless pit, the volcano bubbling. And once you find a grip, I'm going to grab onto that thing and I'm going to climb as fast and as intense as I can, kind of move past it and get myself into safer footing and, more familiar ground. And that that feeling is sometimes one of those things that I go back and reflect on. I definitely reflect on it every single July 5th. Um, so this year being the 10-year anniversary, I didn't think I'd make 10 minutes.
Mm.
So the fact that I get to be here 10 years later and life is materially different for me today than it was 10 years ago. And what a blessing, what a privilege that I got yet another chance at life. Um, and so, for the company that we have, um, um, I really believe in second chances. I believe in third chances, but like there is no losing, right? Either you win or you learn. And then it's kind of this like it just compounds. So um for us, last week was our best week ever in the company's history. And that's an amazing thing to be able to say that, right? And I've said that like a few times this year to anybody that I talked to
That's
last
great
week.
because that's just more and more growth.
Exactly. So I share all of these things because uh, I think there's this recurring theme of like resilience. And when you're going through that, I don't think that you're you're looking at those setbacks or failures as like a learning lesson because it's hard, right?
No, you're
Because
not when you're in the moment. No way.
not in the moment. No, it's devastating. You lost. You had a heartbreak. You were let down.
You're
Someone
emotionally
cheated on you.
attached.
Someone stole from you. Anything, right? But then you get to this point where you go, what can I learn from this experience?
Right. The only thing you can control is how you react to the situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That wasn't, it doesn't come naturally for me,
It doesn't
right?
come naturally for most. This is
Anybody,
something that you have to practice. Detaching
100%.
detaching from the results because those are the things you can't control.
100%. And so the thinking behind the company we call Sharebite today um, is really the set of principles and guiding principles and the values that were formulated in those kind of like in the aftermath of my car accident. And I had a notebook. I discovered like my like love for writing and if you know anybody who's ever been through a concussion, yeah, I just saw the Brett Favre news about how um, you know, recently he was diagnosed with like Parkinson's, and he looks back at he believes he probably had thousands of concussions unknowingly, which is really sad because even one concussion just changes and rewires your brain. And so I've fallen in love with the human brain over the last decade. And I've delved even, you know, deeper into sort of like the crevices of like how the brain operates and all these other things. So there's this concept of neuroplasticity where you can actually, yeah, you can train your brain. It's a
It's
powerful, it's
amazing.
incredible, incredible gift that nature has provided us. Millions of years of evolution to sit here and have the capacity. I mean, like, what a time that we live in today. What a time of abundance. Like, I was sharing with someone on my team. Um, I can't believe that I can literally get on this like winged metal eagle looking thing, right? I pay for a ticket. I get on this thing. I fly anywhere I want in the world. And I get off, and then it's like, you know, if you brought back someone from 500 years ago, or maybe even 100 years ago, they would have looked at you like, "What are you talking about? That's like alien-like," or you probably would have praised, been deified as a supernatural being. But like, we live in a time of abundance, and you can either think of things from a zero sum, you know, sort of aspect where I win and you have to lose, or there's this other type of, framework of thinking where it's like I get to win and like so does everybody else, right?
Yeah.
And I think that like that's actually a beauty of the American sort of form of capitalism. I know capitalism gets a lot of like flack, arguably for different reasons and good for good reasons, but there's still no better other better system. That's the beauty of entrepreneurship, and that's the beauty of like our America's economy is like the innovation economy, right? Like we're not like one specific thing. Our brand is we innovate.
Right.
And we build amazing things, and like we create those things, and I fundamentally believe that, you know, um, if we get our smartest brains all together thinking about the problems that human beings face in society today, right? To me, my first crusade was this, right? People go hungry. They're not going to tell you about it. I told you the story, but my first job, right?
Yep.
I had bills to pay, I had parents to take care of. Like every paycheck went to my parents. I had to pay the bills. Uh, and that was my priority. So therefore, uh, you know, eating was kind of a second sort of, third, fourth, 10th priority for all I care for that time. And to me, there were really two ways that I kind of like held it together. When I stayed late at the office, which typically you do in the financial world, um, the company used to give you like a daily meal stipend to expense for overtime, working overtime. Not a lot of money. But it gets you a meal, and I would get that meal. I'd order it. I'd eat half of it for dinner. I'd save half of it in the fridge um, the next day for lunch. And I wasn't alone. My colleagues all did that, so it wasn't like I was the odd man kind of, doing it. So that was the thing to do back then, because as analysts, um, it's exciting, but it's expensive, right? You don't get paid
Sure.
a whole lot of money to live in New York City and whatnot. So for me, um, the money that I used to make, I saved it all up and I gave it to my parents. And so um, when you look at um, uh, this framework, for me, it was like, look, I remember what it felt like to not know, to not know where my next meal is coming from. And so the two ways that I was able to make ends meet was that, which is, the late night sort of, work or weekend work, meal allowance. And then number two, the tried and the true and tested dollar slice in New York City, right? I still get like, and there's not many. I don't think there's any dollar slice places left in New York City when I come to visit. But man, I'd be remiss if I didn't say I get emotional sinking my teeth into a dollar
Mhm.
slice, because it brings back memories from those days, right?
Right.
From 17 years ago when I
Right.
was in like deep financial trouble. But you know what? I had one goal in mind, and it took me 5 years to kind of like completely transform my parents' like financial situation. Um, but I did, and I'm really proud of that. And I used to beat myself up a lot in my early years. Like, man, all these 5 years, I don't have anything to show for it. Sure, I do. I've got a smile over on my parents' faces and a roof over their heads, and they don't have to worry about money.
Yeah.
Um, and those things were very, very gratifying for me. So following my car accident, I was like, look, I've had all these experiences as an immigrant growing up in New York City, product of the public school system. It's the city that raised me. And I said, I think it's time to build awareness for this issue of food insecurity. I mean, there's a lot of nonprofits out there that do incredible work, right? We partner with one in New York City called City Harvest, which is incredible. They're an amazing partner. I used to volunteer with them back at my early years at Credit Suisse, and it was only right that starting Sharebite and partnering with them
Hmm.
just made sense. So like, um, the thing, it's an election year. We're a few weeks away from the election. Um, you know, 44 million people in this country are food insecure. That's the reported number. And then there's the underreported, the unreported number, right? Which is probably like multiples of that. And so, if we're going to do anything, why not build for abundance? And so the mission, ShareBite's mission of getting every worker in America fed, um, it is an issue that really hits close to home for me because I experienced food insecurity not as a child, because I'm sure my parents went through, but Indian parents are like that, right? They don't tell you anything,
Mm.
right? Everything was great. They don't ever want you to worry about them. But I know for a fact that there were days that my mom probably didn't eat. My parents probably didn't eat because my sister and I were the number one priority. And how many families like that exist, right? But experiencing food insecurity as a young adult early in my career, I count my blessings that I had the opportunity to channel these experiences and like work at places that where I had the privilege of getting myself a meal so long as I worked hard and stayed late. But there's many people that work incredibly hard whose companies don't feed them.
Right.
And that's mind-boggling for me because in like 40 countries across the globe, it's actually standard practice to feed your workers. In fact,
That
if
blew me
you
away. That blew me away when you shared that with me months ago.
like if,
With all of
if
the benefits that we provide to employers provide to employees, the fact that that's not one of them, given you said 44 million people are underfed.
all right, I'm gonna get a little spicy here. So there are probably people that are like, benefits and total rewards leaders are gonna like get upset. But I have to say this. I went to a benefits conference last year. And I spoke. I was a keynote speaker. It was a Reuters benefits conference. And I did the keynote there. And I got to meet a lot of like really accomplished like HR sort of executives. And so I'm sitting around various tables, and I asked one of them like, what are you excited about? What new benefit did you recently implement and whatever? And this person says to me like, we got financial advisory services for all of our employees. And I said, okay, that's great. How many people have like opted in utilization rate wise? It's like, oh, we got 150 people like just signed up for it. And it's amazing. It's been going. So how many employees work there? And he gave me this look like of disgust. Sorry if you're listening. 18,000 employees. You're celebrating that you got 150 people. I'm sorry, offense or no offense. You're celebrating that 150 people signed up for something in a company that's got 18,000 workers, 18,000 employees. Stop the madness. I talk to HR and total rewards leaders all the time. And they're having parties in their offices when they have an 8% utilization rate on any given benefit. One of the most amazing companies, one that I admire the most, among the most, recently said, oh, we're really good about taking care of our employees. We typically have a 20% utilization rate on some benefits. That to me is mind-boggling too, because I fully support pet insurance, but not everybody's got a pet.
Right. Everybody needs to eat.
I fully support the offering of an adoption benefit. I think that's an important one. But not everybody's going to adopt a kid. But why are you paying for that? Right?
Right.
There is a good chance that somebody who works at your company is going hungry, and they will never tell you about it because it just doesn't pay. There's a stigma associated with it. I'm not going to come to you, Greg. Let's say you and I work together. I'm early in my career. I'm trying to prove myself. I'm doing the whole dance. I'm not going to come to you and say, "Hey, Greg, I don't know where my next meal is coming from." You're a great guy, so you're going to say, "Dilip, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that. Like, let me get your lunches on me today." Now, you paid for lunch. I don't think you probably thought nothing of it. I'm ashamed that you paid for my lunch. Okay. Then a month later, you're having your birthday party, and you're like, I'm not. I feel bad inviting Dilip over to my birthday party because I'm going to be having a lot of fun. He just shared with me a month ago he doesn't have money to eat.
Right.
Well intentioned, but how does that make me feel when I come back into the office? Hey, Dilip, you and Gregg are buddies. Like, how come you weren't at his birthday party? I'm not going to say I didn't get the invite. What I'm going to say is, oh, I had a lot going on. I'm sorry that I missed it. Next time. Because I got to keep up the appearance. Every single person that is listening to this feels this, has gone through it, or is probably somebody that you know is going through it, but they'll never tell you about it. That sucks. That is terrible. The stigma associated with that type of vulnerability. Wall Street, you can't be vulnerable, right? You get told from day one, you have no vulnerabilities. You are invincible. Okay. So here I am, right? I have never told a single person. And now the couple buddies that were there with me, sat next to me, they're like, man, I had no idea. I'm sorry. I'm like, no, don't be sorry. I'm so glad that we got to spend the time that we did. You never noticed. And that's the art form that you perfect when you kind of have to do all this stuff, right?
Mm.
So anyway, so point is like that company, very well known company. So that HR leader was like, I'm spending all this money on financial advisory. Absolutely, you should do that, right? But like, we're looking at the hierarchy of needs. Financial advisory services is not top of mind
No.
for like your average worker in America. How am I going to eat is the first question, right? Most Americans don't have a couple $100s saved up for a rainy day. That's why payday lenders exist,
Yeah.
right? Or cash advances and all these other companies. Like, that's a problem in America. Our elected officials are not talking about that stuff, right? So, like, that's the stuff that gets me upset about election cycles is that food insecurity, and my concern is bringing it up to politicians is that they'll turn it into a government program, which then is like another problem because it's well intentioned, but the execution fails, right? And so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like countries like Brazil, Belgium, France, so many different countries have already legislated meal benefits. And they were smart about it because they realized that the best way to solve any problem is to go like, at like the cardinal kind of orders, right? Like you like, all right, well, I'm going to go to the primary source, hunger. Either I can use taxpayer money to fund, this stuff, or I can legislate using the tax code and incentivize companies to feed to offer meal stipends or meal benefits to their workers. And over time that'll get mandated, and I think that this is going to be the signature among the top 5 to top 10 signature, legislative accomplishments over the next decade or so. I think this is going to happen, and I'm here for it, right? But the company that exists today, and last week was our best week ever. This is a crazy idea that came from a crazy life experience that it was like, oh, it was going to figure out how to lean on the private sector to put a dent in hunger, right? We want to help align the incentives for the private sector to undertake the burden of public good. And that works for everybody because most people in the country are actually employed. Food insecurity is not something that like you pattern match thinking like, oh, it's for people that don't have jobs or whatever. Show up at a food bank, show up at a food drive. You will see people dressed professionally on their way to work, picking up like
Oh,
fresh food.
I've seen it. I work at for many years worked at the Temple on 55th and Lexington. Showed up
Yes.
at 6:30 in the morning on Thursdays and Friday mornings, and I was blown away by the folks who I saw who I was feeding.
Young professionals, right? People with families, but they look like they don't belong there because you like one like in
But that's an
2000
assumption. That's based on false assumptions. What does
exactly.
belong there mean?
Exactly. My first experience volunteering at a, food bank like that, food drive, was with City Harvest in August of 2008. And my chimpanzee brain was also pattern matching because I was like, oh, look at all, wait, whoa. I expected people that looked very different or dressed very different to show up at these food drives. And these people are like regular people that you'd see walking to work in the morning, stopping by. And then that was like my early interaction with like, wow, these are regular people. Had it not been in an open setting at like one of those, like, on the Union Square sort of like, food mart, people wouldn't show up there because then like there's a stigma associated with like going to like a soup kitchen or something. Like, they wouldn't do that. But it was genius of City Harvest to do that, like do it in an open market, like, at Union Square.
Right.
And suddenly you have people that really need it show up, and like with minimal, if not any stigma associated with, because you can't be seen, right?
So Dilip, when we started, um, before we hit record, you had said, if you had more time, we could speak some more next week. I want to hit pause here. I'd love to
Yeah.
continue the conversation because I really want to. I want to help people understand what Sharebite is, how they can find Sharebite, and how Sharebite can help them and their companies. But I'd like to hit pause for here,
Yeah.
and maybe you can share how do people for the meantime, we're going to have an episode 2, but for the meantime, how do people find Sharebite, and how do people find you, and how do they contact you?
I'm very findable on LinkedIn. So please feel free to message me. If you're going to add, just send me a quick note saying you heard me on the podcast. Um, you know, Happy to connect there. And and you can just go to sharebite.com. We have an incredible team that is always looking to help companies think through how to get their employees fed. And the thing with meal stipends is that it actually has a 95% utilization rate.
Wow.
And there's nothing like it we'll talk more about this later, but yeah, sharebite.com, BITE, sharebite.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. You could find the company on any kind of social media. Um, and we can help you convince your CFO or your CHRO on implementing employee meal benefits, because we've done that for hundreds of companies already. And it's been game changing and probably life changing for those employees too. We hear that all the time.
Well, congratulations on what you've been able to accomplish in really a very short time. Congratulations on your acknowledgement. I think I just saw on the Inc. 5000, one of the fastest growing companies in the United States.
56.
And wow, it's amazing.
56.
And stay tuned because we're going to continue this conversation on the second half episode.
Thank you.
Dilip, thanks so much.
Thank you, Greg.